Shame equals blame. What do I mean by this? Before I get into that, I want to remind you to vote for yourself right now, because you are the sovereign of you. You are your own ruler, and the real power is in you. So what do I mean by shame equals blame? I mean that if I'm out there blaming others for the way my life has turned out, it's because inside I'm ashamed of myself for something. I'm carrying shame. And most likely I'm carrying that shame because of some act of self-betrayal. Something I should have done differently or could have done differently. At least that's what my ego wants me to believe. Ultimately, we're here to accept ourselves and to identify that negative ego chatter as it's happening and choose not to recognize its authority. So why is it so important to stop blaming? If we're in a state of blame, or in a blame trance, we can actually call it that, we're projecting sickness and vulnerability. If we're in a state of blame, to the trained eye, we are ill at ease, we are vulnerable. Second, if we're blaming, we're not focusing on the true issue. We're putting our focus on what's going on out there, when in truth, we should be focusing on what's going on in here. So when we're in a state of blame, we're outside of ourselves. We're looking beyond ourselves for answers, when we know that all the true answers are within. And third, when we're blaming, we're absolutely powerless, because we've given our power over to that which we are blaming. We are saying, you have done that to me. And what we don't realize we're saying in the process of saying, you have done this to me, is that you have enslaved me and I am powerless to unenslave myself. The circumstances which you have created have enslaved me, which is of course total bullshit. When we realize that we are the sovereigns of our own life, we actually stop blaming, because we know the only person who has the power to enslave me is me. And once I realized this, I also realized that I have all the power I need to set myself free. Because I'm not blaming something else for the circumstances I'm in, I can also change those circumstances. Because I've created them, I also have the power to make them different or fix them. In fact, if anyone ever says to me, don't blame me for this or X or Y or Z, my typical response is, you don't have that kind of power. Which is true, because only I have the power to sabotage myself. And here's the thing. Blame on an industrial scale spells disaster for all of us. Why? Because if two halves of the same country are so busy blaming each other, you basically have an entire country that's in a state of blame and therefore completely powerless. And a person who has given up their power is basically someone else's property at that point. And that person who has become property, who is doing the blaming, has actually done it willingly, because they chose to blame someone else or something else or some other circumstance or whatever for the situation they're in. Why do you think that the messaging we're being bombarded with right now is so completely polarizing? When things are polarized, when things are black and white, night and day, blue and red, it's really easy to point the finger of blame. And if we're all standing around blaming each other, we're completely powerless, which means we can be easily manipulated, and which means, well, the very least, we're not going to be paying attention. And if we're not paying attention, it's really easy to take away our liberty and our personal freedom while we're not looking. So what do we do about it? Well, the first thing we do is we stop blaming. We stop blaming others and we start taking responsibility for what's going on in our own lives. In fact, we do it because we want a better life. We take responsibility for our own lives and for our own mistakes because we know it will make us more powerful to do so. The bad news about this is that we have to accept that what is not going right in our lives is completely our responsibility. But the good news is because it's our responsibility, we also have all the power we need to change it and make it the way we want it, to make it better. And remember, God never gives us more than we can handle. So if it seems like the situation you're in right now is more than you can take, it's not. I promise. You can do it. The second thing we can do is stop making decisions we're not proud of. We all know when we're self-sabotaging because our collective inner children sound off like, what the hell is that? Like, WTF, man? So stop with the self-sabotaging behavior. Stop doing the things that you know you shouldn't be doing, whether it's comfort eating, gaslighting, being codependent, like whatever that thing is, whatever your thing is, just stop doing it or heal it, right? That's another way to think of it. Heal that shit. Then learn some humility, okay? Learn to deal with your mistakes like a mature grown-up. What does that mean? Apologize. Apologize to whoever whatever. Admit your mistakes to yourself, okay? Like, oh, I made a mistake, and that's okay. And don't just admit it to yourself. Don't just admit your mistakes to yourself. You release them. You've acknowledged them. They no longer have any power over you. So don't be afraid to talk to someone you trust about mistakes you feel like you may have made. That's the healthy way to release our mistakes and to prevent blame from creeping up in our lives, because we're not ashamed of ourselves anymore. We've let that go. We've let that shame out, right? Shame equals blame. We've let it go. We've admitted it, and now it no longer has any power over us. Of course, the unhealthy way to deal with that is to allow all of that guilt and shame to pile up inside of us and create kind of like pressure so that it has to get projected out onto our brothers and sisters. The good thing about this is that if we feel that happening, if we catch ourselves in a state of blaming, we can literally check ourselves in that moment and choose not to, because we know the blame is here to steal our power. So if we feel it coming on, we can take a step back, be our witness, observe ourselves, and say, I'm about to blame that person or that place or that thing, and I have the power, not it. And when enough of us start to do that and behave in that way and start to take responsibility for what's going on instead of casting blame, we start to become a society of sovereign human beings, of sovereign individuals. Which will of course spell the end for any forces which may currently be enjoying a certain level of freedom and anonymity by the massive disempowerment that's currently sort of casting a shadow across the land by all the blame and blame shifting and projecting that's going on right now. So when we stop blaming and we become sovereign individuals, we cast light on that. We cast light on the fact that there are structures in place that are created expressly to provoke blame, and we can say we're not going to do that anymore. And guess what? When we do that, those power structures spontaneously lose all their power over us. We are reclaiming our power, and as a result, that which seeks to take our power from us drops. It's like when the Night King gets killed and all the White Walkers just collapse. That's how it works. And they know this, okay? They know that if enough people start taking responsibility for their own lives, it spells curtains for them. Why do you think it's being laid on so thick right now? And when we wake up and realize that it's actually us against ourselves, and therefore I have the power to fix this, when I stop saying they did this to me, when I stop blaming and start owning my own stuff, and I take my power back, and we become the solution in our own lives, it's the end for them. And they know this. And now, hopefully, you know it too. So, we're gonna stop with the blaming. We're gonna start owning our stuff. We're gonna start apologizing when we screw up, and we're gonna start being proud of ourselves. We're gonna start being the parent that our inner child has always wanted, and then we will become sovereign, empowered human beings, and no one will ever be able to take that away from us. And anyone who tries will not be able to succeed. So let me ask you, can you actually do the things you love without hating yourself for doing them? That's kind of the thing. When we do the things we love, a lot of the times we wind up hating ourselves for doing it. And we kind of have to ask ourselves, is it because the things we love doing are bad, or is it because we've been conditioned through blame to actually hate the part of us that loves doing the things we love? So, here's how we can break down doing the things we love. We can either A, choose to do the things we love and love ourselves for doing them, or we can B, not do the things we love and live with ourselves for not doing the things we love to avoid hating ourselves for doing it, or we can C, which is what most people wind up doing in the end anyway, is we can do the things we love and then we can hate ourselves for doing them, which is crazy, right? I think what we should all sort of strive for is to do the things we love and to love the part of us that chooses those things. We need to love what we do. And one surefire way to make sure that we can always trust ourselves to love the things we do is to take responsibility for our own mistakes. If we have no guilt or shame inside of us, then we feel very whole and complete doing the things we love. That part of us that blames ourselves, the negative self-chatter that's been blaming ourselves this whole time for doing the things we love, that part of us doesn't exist when we deal with our mistakes in a healthy way. I know, interesting times, right? Like, who knew that the most important thing we could do to save humanity is to take responsibility for ourselves? And guess what? When we start taking responsibility for ourselves, we can't be so easily manipulated. We actually understand how important our personal sovereignty and therefore our personal freedom is. And when we're awakened to this, it can't be taken from us anymore. We're not powerless, we're not distracted, we're engaged, and we're sticking up for our own personal sovereignty because we know that we don't deserve anything less than that. So it's a lot, right? But it's also not that much because we have that power within ourselves to make those changes. I'm praying for all of us. I love you all, and good night.